Back, everybody. As you all know, this is our CIB presidential seminar series. CIB, as you all know, is the International Council for Research and Innovation in Building and Construction, and we are broadcasting this seminar from Purdue University. And our theme for this semester is distinguished women researchers in the built environment. And today we have a really distinguished member. She is also the vice president of CIP, and that is Professor Patricia Tzortzopoulos. She's professor of integrated design, director of the Innovation Design Lab Research Center. She's also head of the Department for Building Design and Built Environment in the School of Arts and Humanities at University of Huddersfield. In addition to that, she comes from, of course, an architectural background, and her interests cover design management, lean construction, value generation, building information modeling, and the design of healthcare facilities and social housing. She developed research projects that examining requirements management, evidence-based design, code checking in healthcare design, participatory design, BIM in the retrofit of social housing, and among others. Patricia has been an active member of the International Group for Lean Construction since 1998, having served as reviewer and conference editor and organizer a number of times. Patricia, as I mentioned, is currently the vice president of CIB and brings to us a wealth of knowledge in today's seminar talking about user value in social housing retrofit. So with that said, over to Patricia.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for that kind introduction. And it's really a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I hope it works. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you again for the invitation to take part of the seminar series. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, as I said. So today I'm going to talk to you about some of the results of an international research project, which is called UVital. So it's user-valued innovations for social housing upgrading through transatlantic living labs. The project was developed in a collaboration in between 4 different institutions globally, so ourselves at the University of Huddersfield, TU Delft in the Netherlands, the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Leipzig in Germany, and Unicamp in Brazil, and the colleagues in Unicamp were the main leaders of the research project. The project was 2.5 years in duration overall. It just completed very recently, a month or so ago. And it was funded through the Transatlantic Platform for Social Sciences and Humanities. So before I talk about the project itself, I just wanted to give you an overview of our campus at the University of Huddersfield and where we are. So we are kind of in the middle of the UK, as you can see there from the map. And in the right side of the slides, you can see a couple of pictures from our campus. So we have some very nice facilities around. We have a state-of-the-art building, which was in which we've hosted all of our student-facing areas for the School of Arts and Humanities, and it would be a pleasure if I could welcome you at the campus at some point. And also, I wanted to talk very, very briefly about the Innovative Design Lab, which is our research center. We have 3 different areas of research themes across the center. One is around lean construction, and we work around different areas, including theory building and design and building information modeling, mass customization. We have a thematic area around digital technologies, and those are mixed up with the lean area as well. So we've done work around automated compliance checking in healthcare facilities, actually, the use of virtual reality, use of BIM tools for RETROFIT, as it was described already. And the third thematic area of research we do across the center is around healthcare design, and that includes both healthcare for the built environment, so looking at the healing built environment, and the use of different approaches to support design and construction for healthcare environments, but also product design, product design for healthcare products. So that is us in a nutshell. And of course, we have a number of different research projects ongoing at the moment, and you can take a look at those projects in our research center web pages. So going back to the EU Vital project. So the idea when we pulled the proposal for the project together, the goals were to try and identify issues through which that we could address through research to try and help improve the process of social housing upgrading or retrofitting. So we used in the context of a project, we used the term upgrading to refer to retrofit or improvement of existing social housing facilities, right? So the idea is to try and mitigate issues around social costs that happen when you have poor quality social housing, conflicts, and how the housing itself affects actually climate change. So improve energy efficiency, which is one of the main drivers for a lot of investment in the UK and elsewhere in Europe around the improvement of existing houses. So we also wanted to look at identifying different strategies to help deliver user values through those retrofit projects and promote social change through social innovation, increasing learning and consensus in decision-making, and also using these two concepts, which I'm going to be talking a bit more about in a minute, which is the concept of living labs and testing what we call boundary objects, which are different tools that have been used to try and identify user values, user needs in the context of retrofitting social homes. So the main issue that kind of drove the beginning of the project was the idea that, okay, we have these drivers, so there's a lot of social changes and a number of societal challenges, not least the issues around the climate change, and also in the context of social housing, specifically the problems that I was referring to earlier on around the social costs that we have and the inequalities that exist when you have poor level facilities, you know, and the fact that the poor level housing actually tends to support, you know, to maintain inequalities in society, which is of course a problem. And the volume of inadequate housing. Sorry, can you? Okay. And the volume of inadequate housing with inadequate conditions that exists in different parts of the globe. We also wanted to try and understand, of course, the physical attributes of existing houses and also neighborhood characteristics in order to try and identify strategies to help improve energy efficiency of those houses, but also look at stakeholders' expectations and identify ways in which we could take the opportunity of the big investment that is happening across different countries, you know, especially in Europe, in improving social homes, to also identify where opportunities lie, not only to improve energy efficiency of those homes, but provide better quality of life and better environments for the communities as well. So we've started the work from this conceptual framework in which we have the drivers basically are mainly social and societal challenges, including climate change and the issues around social costs of poor housing, and looking at local conditions around stakeholder expectations, the physical attributes of existing housing, but also how communities behave and interact within those neighborhoods. The goals that we had was to try and mitigate those social costs, reduce conflict, address some of the issues around climate change and reduction of energy or improvement of energy efficiency in social homes, whilst at the same time delivering user values, increasing learning in the process of designing those retrofit alternatives and on implementing the construction of those retrofits as well on site, and create and use different tools to help create consensus, right? And help increase shared understanding among stakeholders, because we know that in any design and construction project, we have a number of stakeholders, and there tends to be difficulties in terms of achieving levels of consensus, because different stakeholders have different needs, different requirements, and sometimes those needs and requirements are conflicting. So it's important to find ways to mitigate and achieve this idea of shared understanding and common ground, and by doing that to actually build some trust. And we use the living labs as a means to actually enable us to achieve that. And the living lab worked around analyzing the scope of those projects, developing some level of co-creation, and we'll describe how we've done that, and also some evaluation at the end. So I've got, as I mentioned beforehand, we had case studies in 4 different countries, and I've got a little video here that actually shows you a bit of those case studies. So I'll let you run now. And if you can't hear me, let me know. Hopefully you'll be able to hear.
A cerca de 15 quilômetros do centro de Campinas, os moradores do residencial Quilombo 2 vivem uma vida simples, mais feliz. Mas com algumas mudanças, a vida no bairro poderia ficar melhor. Para tornar o Quilombo 2 um lar mais confortável, estudantes de arquitetura e urbanismo da Unicamp participam do projeto Vital.
A gente gostaria que as pessoas mesmo percebem as oportunidades e produzem melhorias.
Em visitas ao bairro, a equipe conversa com os moradores e realiza jogos e atividades para que eles apontem as melhorias que o local precisa. A partir desse contato, os estudantes podem propor as melhorias. Um concurso foi realizado e ideias como hortas e composteiras, um parquinho para as crianças e um centro de convivência foram elaborados. E tudo para que eles se sintam mais integrados ao bairro. O projeto continua em desenvolvimento. Estão previstas ainda uma etapa de co-design de propostas e a avaliação dos resultados.
The focus of the German Vital case study within a social housing estate is on the refurbishment project of 4 9-story buildings. The majority of the residents are elderly people with low income living alone in a 1 or 2 room apartment. In order to gain insights into the process of social housing upgrading and user involvement, interviews were conducted with different stakeholders. Representatives from the housing company, the construction planning, the construction companies, including the workers and the residents. During the upgrading process, the residents will remain in their dwellings. The major annoyance for them is the disruption caused by dirt and noise from the construction work. We soon realized that in this particular case, resident participation and housing upgrading was limited. As a result, the focus of the project shifted to the green space between the buildings. Here, virtual reality is used to show and discuss different design options.
The main aim of this project is to try and understand how useful the concept of a living lab is to define and tease out user values and user needs in the context of retrofitting social houses.
We have been looking into how to use different tools as part of our living lab workshops to better elicit and capture user requirements and values.
Been using 3 different tools. One is the building information modeling, value cards, and obviously the interview protocols.
Our VR cave help different stakeholders to become immersed and to actually understand and improve their awareness of the project, collaborating towards a shared understanding. We have actually created 3 different BIM models, one for the houses as they are, one for the houses as they will be, and one model which is specific around a construction stage.
We've developed the value cards.
So these are to help us to understand the different preferences of the users.
At the end of the project, we want to be able to have a protocol that is generic enough, but that also actually takes in consideration contextual issues, which will be influencing whatever retrofit is happening in different locations.
In the northeast of the Netherlands, the apartments of Straat Bali are due to be renovated. TU Delft, together with Acanthus and Plektvos, uses interviews and VR to communicate the values of different stakeholders to each other. In the first living lab, residents were able to choose the tiling for their new bathrooms and kitchen, establishing their commitment. At the start of the renovation, our VR will present the hindrances residents will face so that they can prepare accordingly. The next phase is to redesign the communal garden using an adaptive value card system, our garden Tinder. Residents will be invited to a collaborative VR co-design workshop. Finally, the residents will choose one of 3 designs, which will be realized with finances from a cantus reserved for communal growth.
Okay, thank you for that. I just thought it would be important to know that the video actually provides an overview of the different case studies, and it actually represents also quite well how different each one of the cases ended up being. So in Brazil, of course, we had the houses. The houses are owned by the users, right? It's a very, very low level of income, the areas that were used as a case study. It are all detached houses, and of course the climate is very, very different. And in terms of the upgrading itself, it's much more bottom-up approach. So the upgrading happens when the owner occupiers actually have a need, you know, and sufficient resources to actually implement those changes. In Germany, the Netherlands, and the UK, the users were always tenants, so those facilities were either owned by the local authorities or housing associations. In the UK and the Netherlands, there were low-income families in low just housing, and in Germany it was, of course, high-rise buildings. And in the 3 European contexts, the retrofits were actually funded by the local authorities or housing associations. So in terms of the living labs, what is the concept of living lab? The living lab, the idea of a living lab is to actually create an environment in which you can bring different stakeholders together. And in our living lab specifically, we had ourselves as, in the UK, we had ourselves as the knowledge institutions, right? We've involved the local authority and planning authorities as part of the public sector users. We engaged with users themselves of the housing that was going to be retrofitted, and also we had involvement of architects and we tried to have the involvement of construction companies, but it didn't come to effect. But the idea is to bring all those different stakeholders with very, very different needs, requirements, and goals to actually discuss together in a same shared space. So in terms of the stages of the living lab, what we've done is we've used a stage of analysis to facilitate engagement, a stage of innovation to support co-creation. And there wasn't loads of co-creation, but basically we were showing alternative solutions to users and discussing them with them, as well as with the local authority and with designers, to help and identify those needs and try and identify opportunities to implement user needs more into the retrofit solutions, and also a stage of evaluation. And we use different elements as boundary objects, as I mentioned beforehand, and you've heard in the video some of those objects that we use, like bin models, the VR cave, and the value cards. We try to use those multiple tools and activities in a way to try and identify which tools would be more appropriate to identify which kind of information, and to build common ground as well and help gain trust in between the different stakeholders involved in those retrofitting projects. So that was the timeline of the project. I'm not going to go through it, but as I said, we used a number of tools in the UK case studies. Different tools were used in Brazil. So for instance, the design charrettes, and the VR was used more extensively in Germany and in the Netherlands. So some of the individual case results. So in the Brazilian context, what happened was that there wasn't any financing for the retrofit to be happening as the project was developed. The focus of the discussion ended up being more around what could be done to improve the street in which the housing. So it was a couple of streets basically in which the social housing were located. And the events changed, as I say, the focus ended up changing from the individual house itself for more community type of activities and facilities, and to the improvement of common areas in the region. Okay, of course, the design charrette that was used was very positive because it engaged the community in actually trying and propose those the improvements in these semi-public areas, as you like. So in Germany, the main activities was basically the whole work was based on a very large long-term survey of those high-rise buildings that were part of the case study, and the population was mostly elderly and frail pensioners that were actually living there. And the issues of noise, dust, loss of privacy, and of course were quite present and quite prominent in the case study. So what ended up happening again is that the whole of the discussion moved from the within each apartment for the outside and communal areas as well, and the work happened. The 3D modeling happened around that too. So in the Netherlands, the case study there was actually quite a remote village in the Netherlands, and the users are basically elderly people. It's a mix of elderly people and immigrants as well, which creates, again, difficult issues around social inclusion, right? And during the construction of the retrofit itself, actually the users were evacuated, so they didn't stay in the homes. And that created a number of issues in terms of, okay, well, will my home still be there? Will my possessions be secure during the construction, and so on? So VR was used to try and help mitigate those issues, and it was also used to try and provide means through which the users could identify potential alternatives, like for the kitchens and for the bathrooms, colors of tiles, so alternative solutions that could be then implemented within their homes. The second part of the project there was around actually using VR again to identify new alternative solutions for the semi-private areas. So for the gardens, how can we, what could be done to actually improve gardens and semi-private areas? And a lot of the VR testing was around the open spaces as well. And in the UK, I mean, the users are families, they're tenants, and the Living Lab was actually, we managed to have our Living Lab done with a pilot study of a retrofit of 8 social homes in the UK. And you can see the picture of what does the retrofitted homes look like afterwards. So the main priorities were, of course, around facade aesthetics, fence design, how do they actually manage waste, you know, and the involvement of users in the process of understanding what alternatives there were in the design process, and also the use of BIM for them to see what would happen during construction was perceived to be very, very positive by the housing users themselves. And it was perceived as positive by our local authority partners as well, because they saw that it actually helped maintain a more productive level of conversation in the process, right, during the process. So the use of BIM, and I'll tell about that, what we've done. So basically those are basically the specifications. So as with a lot of the retrofitting of social homes in the UK, it's all focused around using external wall insulation, right? So that's why the focus ended up being around external rather than internal spaces. And in terms of the tools we used, we've developed interviews with trying to identify user needs and values in the process. And we use the laddering technique to map out those user values and identify elements for user satisfaction as well. And those are represented in this graph here on the slide. Value cards were actually used to try again to identify in between a number of different issues that could be improved in the housing, what would be the most important elements, you know, so where the investments should be actually focused. And we use that with the users, basically this, presenting the cards with different elements and asking what would be more important for you in your house, and then collating that information again. And then we also use the BIM models, and as was described in the video, we had the model of the housing as it was before the retrofit, and a model of the housing afterwards, what it would look like, and also the model that described the retrofit processes as well, and that was very useful to help users understand the levels of disruption they will need to face during that process. And we used the immersive cave as well, and we thought that the users would be really happy to actually use the cave and be immersed in the designs, and we ended up realizing that the users weren't that comfortable with it because some people felt a little awkward, they didn't feel comfortable, you know, and they actually liked using the BIM models more than using the immersive cave, which was something that surprised us in terms of results. So, in terms of our results, I mean, one of the things that wasn't predicted in the beginning of the project at all, but ended up happening to a certain degree or another across all the 4 different case studies in the 4 countries, was the focus to actually to the green and semi-public areas, right? Because I think there is people sometimes have difficulties in opening up their own houses, and they don't want a lot of other people to look at what their houses look like and to discuss elements which have to do with their very private spaces, right? And that's why discussions tended to actually move to these semi-public areas. We see that the living labs actually were an enabler of conversations, and they did work quite well in terms of helping create this idea of shared understanding. And what we felt as well is that we managed to achieve some empowerment by the users. So users felt more empowered by being engaged in the living labs and by having a much clearer information that was presented to them in a very, very much clearer way that they could very, very easily understand, right? What we did felt in terms of some of the issues, though, is that there was some limited decision-making processes across the 4 different case studies again, and that was because, for instance, in the UK, the case study, the retrofit itself had happened when we managed to get the users into the university, so it was done a little bit in a retrospective perspective, so that was a problem. And the same happened across the other countries, so there were some limitations in terms of how much of those user needs could effectively be implemented in the retrofitting of those cases, right? And that is to do with some of the difficulties of having a live living lab. In terms of some of the Atlantic divide, as we used to call it within the project, of course, we had the focus of upgrading is quite different in between the European case studies, so which is all about improving energy efficiency to help governments achieve their low carbon emission targets. In Brazil, it was much more around the issue of how functional the spaces are, or sometimes aesthetics of the houses and so on. And the fact that the European cases were supported by government, whilst the Brazilian case didn't have that level of financial support, also made a big difference in the process. So in the European countries, a lot of it was in a way mandatory upgrading. So it was very much top down, whilst in Brazil it was much more bottom up. And in terms of the social, environmental, and technical challenges, those are all of those influence the process and the outcomes of the process as well. But we were very, I think the most important result that we achieved is actually this empowerment of voice that was achieved through the engagement with users. Also, what we also discovered is that it is very important to have multidisciplinary teams to organize living labs. You know, we do have to have people with very, very different skills to help ensure that those living labs achieve the objectives that we set out to achieve with them, and enable the appropriate level of conversations that were supposed to happen. So what we've developed at the end of the project is a list of recommendations for living labs and how living labs and different types of digital and analog tools could be used to help the process, both the process of developing retrofits in social homes, but also the engagement with users and the identification of user needs. So we align those recommendations around the different stages of the living lab, so around the analysis, what kinds of information we need to look into that. So what may be, the types, the selection of tools, the importance of having approaches which are flexible. As you probably realize, the cases ended up being very, very different, even though in the beginning we set out to do the same case, very, very similar case study activities in each country. They ended up being very different because of the contextual issues in each one of them. Then around the issue of innovation and co-creation, an interesting result was especially in the UK case studies, there was a lot of reticence from the local authority, who are the owners of the houses, in terms of engaging properly with users, because they were always very afraid that there would be a very heightened increased level of expectations from users, and that would then generate dissatisfaction at the end of the project. So you have to have strategies to very carefully manage that during the process. And then the issue of evaluation and feedback, both of the results in terms of energy efficiencies after the retrofit, but the level of satisfaction of users with the process, with the retrofit process as well. So some of the learnings that we had. So for users, it was really all about achieving this increased perception of their environment, and achieved an increased understanding of what is possible, feasible, where the constraints are, which was really important. The awareness of the upgrading of the retrofit process itself and the level of disruption that would happen as part of that, because a lot of users weren't really aware of that at the beginning of the process. We did manage to achieve some commitment to changes, which was very important both from the user's perspective and from the local authorities' perspective as part of the process. And I think because we were discussing issues around energy efficiency, we also helped increase the knowledge of housing users around the importance of energy efficiency measures, some issues related to how to ensure that the houses after the retrofit would perform as best as they can from a use-based perspective. For other stakeholders, I think it was really important to support some learning in terms of respecting and understanding different needs and views. The importance of reducing disruption for users was really highlighted, and also the risks that happen for the project delivery itself when you don't take those issues into consideration, as well as the importance of considering privacy issues. And for us, as a researchers, I think the issue of gaining trust across the different stakeholder groups was really important, really challenging, important in this project. And also this idea of the use of those different tools as boundary objects, I think is something that we need to investigate further, because they can bring a number of benefits, and I'm sure that could be other tools that could be investigated as well in that. And just to finalize, so those are the kind of the recommendations. So in terms of generic stages of a living lab, so it's all about preparing the upgrade and the refurbishment process, understanding the context of it, being user-centered, choosing community issues for engagement, because they tend to be easier and people get more interested in those. So preparing users for the inconvenience, the disruptions they will have to face, make stakeholders aware of the benefits of the engagement processes, and the use of different tools, so models, VR, BIM, videos, 3D maps, charrettes, and so on. So I believe that was all I had to say. I hope I didn't overrun very much. I thank you all for the attention, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Patricia. That was a very interesting seminar indeed. Let me open it up for, I'm sure people have questions. So if you have a question, please open your mic and ask that.
Yeah, please do so. I'll be very happy to discuss any issues in more detail. Or
So while people are thinking about their question, let me throw in mine, and then I'll come back to the audience. Often from my understanding, ideas that you were getting from the community in terms of improvement and what needs to be done, often they need to be followed up with some funding sources of some kind. And I was wondering if, how were you able to resolve that or connect, the aspirations of the community with some of the funding sources that can then follow up to the next level after the project is over.
yeah, in our case, in the case study in the UK, what has happened is basically the council was already investing in the retrofit of those 8 houses, and we were looking at that as a pilot project, and they then had funding to extend that the strategies used in the pilot project in a larger volume of houses that need to be retrofitted. So currently they're talking about retrofitting around 80 houses across the local authority. So in a way, the research project was developed. The idea is that we would be able to develop it concurrently with the design of the retrofit. But because working with local authorities can be so challenging sometimes, we ended up the retrofit project design was done, the works on site started, and only then we were able to start actually engaging with users. And that's why I think the council also was a little wary about the level of expectations, increasing expectations. So we had to talk to the users saying, okay, well, retrospectively, if you had seen this at the beginning, before the whole process started, would that have been useful? So that was the case for us in the UK. In Brazil, there wasn't any funding, so they had even more difficulties. Basically, they just couldn't implement very much. And what they did was, with the community, they've improved a bit the communal areas, but there was very, very limited funding available. And that, of course, was a barrier to the project. And in the Netherlands and Germany, there was some level of involvement during the retrofit. But again, that's why I think we ended up all different collaborators in the project ended up looking at external areas because of this jointing between the project the retrofit project timelines and the research project timelines. Also, I didn't mention in the beginning, but the project started in 2020. So right at the beginning, we went into lockdown and we couldn't do very much for quite some time, and that, of course, also influenced the project. But I think we had some positive results, and we could see that implementing those tools and the processes right at the beginning would bring even more positive results, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was also wondering about the pandemic, because when you shared the timeline, that must have quite affected what your team could have done on the ground. So for sure.
It did, yeah, it did. And it also affected our shared understanding across the different countries as well, because we all come with our own backgrounds and we were all coming from slightly different disciplinary backgrounds. So we had social science, we had architects, we had geographers all working together. So that influenced it as well. But it was a very interesting challenge there.
Let me see. Anybody else has questions? Please open your mic and ask question directly. I cannot see everybody on my screen, so unfortunately won't be able to tag who's. So instead of raising your hand, just open your mic and ask questions there. Jeff, do I see your mic open? Well, please open your mic and ask questions if you have any. No need to raise your hand. All right, so I'm going to follow up, and as people are thinking about questions, Uh, you mentioned about the project in Netherlands where you were dealing with the residents, and there was a retrofit that was recommended. So it, you said they had to move out during the retrofit process. Was additional social housing provided for those residents? I think you mentioned 70 or 80 residents that were
Yeah.
there.
Yes. Basically, that was I think it was a decision of the owners of the homes that it would be better to actually move residents, and that is always a problem because we had the same issues in the UK as well. There were discussions about should they be moved somewhere else to then so that the retrofit happens and then move back, but the local authority in the UK decided not to move them out of their houses because it would create even more disruption from the users. So it was assumed that it would be better because a lot of the work was being done on to the outside of the houses regardless. They took the decision that it would be better to maintain residents where they were. In the Netherlands, they were all moved, and there were lots of complaints that were actually generated exactly because even though they were put in temporary good accommodation, they were very unhappy and they felt really insecure about what will happen to their homes. Would they going to be able to go back to their homes and all that? So it's a difficult problem. It seems like a simple one, but it's quite difficult, in terms of managing expectations. Yeah.
I mean, your approach was very, very interesting. Particularly when you talk about living labs, the number of questions that were coming to my mind were, what was the length of the living lab? And because it's a living research process, you might have come across additional issues and problems
Of
that
course.
needed to be taken care of. So if you could speak to that as well.
Of course. Thank you, Mark. Yeah. So the living lab happened pretty much across the project. So as soon as we could do it after COVID, we started actually engaging with users. We've implemented it as a set of workshops in which we had those different stakeholders present, right? And we did have difficulties even with that, just some of the workshops we couldn't run. Some of the planned workshops we just couldn't run because there was one or two different stakeholders groups which weren't actually represented. That was quite difficult as well. So it's not, I think the whole idea of running a research project, which is aligned to a live building project, is really strong in terms of the kinds of results that you can achieve and the level of validation that you can achieve on the tools as well that you're using as you're applying them. But it does present the research teams with a very big number of challenges, I have to say, because sometimes stakeholders don't engage. I mean, we had, for instance, architects with just came once and then they said, well, I'm not being paid to be part of this, so I'm not spending my time on it. Things that we wouldn't expect necessarily, but those are like day-to-day things that happen, and they do influence, they end up influencing the results we get as part of the project as well. But I think it was really interesting that we all had the issues and all across the different countries, the issues were slightly different, but the issues around difficulties in engagement of the owners and of design and construction companies were actually pretty similar across the board. Right.
I mean, that is an interesting
which is
problem,
interesting
right? I
to
mean,
see.
you were already working with multiple countries and multiple environments, and to handle that during COVID must have definitely created some challenges as well.
Yes, it did.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, going back to the audience, questions, please. Open your mic and ask your questions.
It's a very quiet audience today, which is fine, no problem.
Don't worry.
Yes, go ahead.
I'll ask a question. So you're dealing with people from different countries and cultures and different languages. Was there any effort to translate the questions in a way that ensured like the same question was really being asked rather than just literal translations from, I mean, language can have different meanings with just a literal translation.
Yeah, yes, you're correct. You are correct. I mean, we did have issues with language, the types of languages that are being used. For instance, the value cards themselves were used both in Brazil and in the UK, and I can speak Portuguese, so of course that was less difficult, and we were more assured that the translations were correct. But in some instances, we ended up adapting some of the questions, right? Also, when we are doing interviews with users, even though we kind of agreed on a set protocol, we used semi-structured interviews exactly because we knew that it would, in some cases, it wouldn't really be possible to ask exactly the same questions, and we weren't looking at any quantitative type of analysis of the results anyway. We're looking at qualitative analysis and description. So there were slight variations, I think, on the contents of the questions that we asked, you know, but we did interview all different stakeholder groups across all countries, you know, so that was, that enabled us to achieve certain level of cross comparison. But you are correct. I mean, the issue of language barriers can be quite a big one. But everybody spoke English, so very well.
Thank you. Obrigado.
Thank you.
So that was a very interesting question, Dave. And you know, particularly in multiple environments. Patricia, did you start with a questionnaire that was pre-sorted that you would want your research team across the different locations to ask?
Yeah, we what we've done is we developed questionnaires for different purposes. So we had the questionnaire which was focused for the users, and the aim was to try and understand what they expected from the retrofit, what were the main values, what would they like to have in an ideal world, and that was shared again across all countries. Then we had interviews with ourselves with local authorities, you know, as the owners of the facilities, and also housing associations. And those interviews were slightly different across the 4 countries, right? Because what we were trying to understand at the end of the day is what were the priorities, what are the main constraints that they had as users, you know, and how they would be able to then take forward whatever potential solutions we would identify through the living labs. And we also had the sets of interviews with those involved in design and construction. And again, in the Netherlands, they didn't really manage to do any. In the UK, we did a couple, but it was very little information, basically, that we could use from those interviews. In Germany, they couldn't access architects at all, but they accessed the construction companies, and they were basically just reporting the issues they had in the process because of the nuisance that the users are whilst they are living in the house. So it's really interesting to see those different views and perspectives. But it is, as I said, I don't think we could have used exactly the same kinds of questions anyway because of the differences in context, which are quite drastic, really.
Okay. Well, going back to the audience, I had a follow-up question. I'm going to go check with the audience first. Any other questions? Please open your mic and ask your question, please.
I think one thing I'm going to comment whilst people think of questions is that we started off the project thinking that the most advanced technologies would be the better to actually try and identify user needs and values. So we had that as an assumption. At the end of the project, we realized that that's not the case necessarily at all, right? So the value cards, which are basically physical cards that talk about different elements of the housing, right, were much more, but really very much appreciated by the users. They could easily classify things. They found it fun to use. And I think it was something, again, for the fact that it is something physical, made them feel more comfortable with them. And the 3D-sided cave, which we thought would wow everybody, was actually a no-go area, you know. So they liked to see models, so that they were just looking at them from their seats and somebody else showing them around, but they didn't really like the immersive experience at all whatsoever. And in the Netherlands, they did quite a lot more of the use of VR, you know, for really actually moving elements within a virtual environment and looking at how things are. But again, a lot of people had difficulties in using those VR tools, right? Not everyone was comfortable, especially all elderly as residents that just couldn't use those tools. So I think that was an important learning for us as well. You know, sometimes analog, simple tools can actually work better.
So, you know, as a follow-up question to that, you know, because you were working in 4 different environments, quite a bit of difference in the GDP of these different countries. So, in terms of equalizing the social housing and the expectations, did you have to do something special, or how did you factor that into your analysis?
I think we took that as a given, and we didn't really try to equalize it at all, because it would be impossible. You know, it just would be impossible. If you cannot compare a social house in Brazil with a social house in Germany, you just can't compare it. From the way it is built to the way it is used to the user needs is just impossible. So we took it as a given that the houses were different, the contexts are different, and the needs would be very, very different. And then we focused on the process of actually supporting those users to highlight what they want, what they need, and then pass that information on to other stakeholders. So I think the equalization was more on the process level rather than the product, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it would be interesting in itself to identify, you know, what were the social housing expectations across these 4 interesting case studies, given that, you know, of course, the cost of living factor is quite different. The social housing expectations probably were quite different.
Yeah, but the most different, the most starking difference, Mark, was actually the fact that the houses in Brazil are owned by the users, and in the other countries they are actually tenants. So that made the hugest difference at all, you know, because basically, because the houses are owned by the users in Brazil, there isn't anyone funding or helping them in actually retrofitting, whilst in the other countries there is this top-down mandate of, okay, we need to retrofit because we have those targets to achieve in terms of carbon emissions. So it's a very different process altogether.
And these rents were subsidized, where
Yes.
it was rental, and I see.
Yes. All of them are subsidized by the government, yeah.
Well, going back to our audience, questions. We still have a few minutes. If you have a pressing question coming up, please open your mic and ask the question. Unfortunately, I cannot see you all on my screen. So yes, go ahead.
So I wanted to ask, is there any like new upcoming research where they can leverage on existing or upcoming technologies in the industry? For example, there was a time when I think it was Meta or Facebook, they released this new VR headgear, and then it's going to be like a big thing now. So I was just looking into if there are existing research that can help implement that for the simple use of almost anyone. For example, shopping online now has kind of been a little bit easier. For example, if you want to buy something, you can see how it will look like in your room with a simple model on. So stuff like that could probably make it easier for adoption of some of this VR technology, and for ease of even understanding how much a particular cost for fixing or introducing a new component to a particular would be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and this is, I think, what I was meaning when I was saying, okay, we had difficulties because we couldn't do the research project very well aligned. The timing of the research project wasn't very well aligned with the timing of the retrofit project itself. If it had been, that was exactly the idea. So you show alternatives, you show different scenarios, right? Different colors of finishes, different types of finishes, and you help then users basically decide what they want, right? And of course, I think there's a huge role to play on other types of technologies, and VR should be helping us to do that. But I think there's still a long way to go until we get to the position where it's like going to the supermarket and say, okay, I can see what I'm buying on the screen, you know. But hopefully you'll get to the position where you can just pick and choose and then support those decision-making processes in that way. But as I say, I think it is, we are still a little bit far because of all the technical issues, all the financial constraints there are, timeline constraints, and so on.
Well, thank you for that question. We are almost running out of our time. Actually, we have gone past our time. But if there's a pressing question, please open your mic and ask. Anybody else? Well, so as I always do, let me ask the last question. And Patricia, again, thank you very much. That was a very interesting seminar. And there are a lot of questions that come to my mind. And one of them was that you looked at 4 different countries and 4 different housing projects, social housing projects. Were the outcomes of your research able to influence policy in those countries?
Well, I think the answer is slightly different for each one of the countries, right? In Brazil, we haven't managed, I don't think, to influence policy because there was very little involvement of COAB, which is the housing association, if you like, that actually was involved in producing those houses and delivering them. And actually, there were issues there because COAB said, so, okay, well, you university deal with the community because we don't want to have anything to do with it because we deliver the project and that's it, right? So in that environment, there basically wasn't much influence, and it's very difficult for it to happen, I think, because of the way the projects are financed to start off with. I think in Germany, in the Netherlands, and in the UK, we have better chances to influence policy, right? We have had further discussions with local authorities and housing associations, and they've seen the benefits of it, especially because there is up to a certain degree, there is a retrofit process that has to be followed in the UK, so there are standards. And as part of those standards, there is a need for the housing, the owners, the financial owners of the housing, to have some level of engagement with users. So that influence, I think, is there. So the use of different tools and technologies and the more participatory living life kind of process is actually seen as of benefit by the stakeholders. So we hope that we'll be able to influence them even further in the future.
That in itself is a interesting outcome, isn't it? I mean, you're influencing social housing needs in 4 different parts of the world, yet the influences are likely to be, governed from a political standpoint. So that's very interesting in itself. Well, thank you very much. That was, as I said, very interesting seminar. And let's all of us open our mics and give her a big round of applause. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for listening. I hope you found it useful and informative. And if you want, we have a number of publications actually on the project, and which talk much more in detail about the different results we achieved. So of course, feel free to take a look at what's out there. And if you want any further information, feel free to contact me. I'll be very happy to tell you more about the project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Mark, again for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
So I think they're slowly signing off and
Okay.
their comments coming in.
Yeah.